Welcome to Washington Today on C-SPAN Radio for Wednesday, October 18, 2023. Republican Congressman Jim Jordan loses a second vote for House Speaker to try to replace former Speaker Kevin McCarthy, who was ousted 2 weeks ago. In the second round, 22 Republican House members vote for someone other than Congressman Jordan for Speaker, 2 more than in the first round. Congressman Jordan vows to stay in the Speaker's race and try to convince those Republicans to support him. As some Republicans and some Democrats are thinking about, in the absence of a permanent Speaker, giving the temporary Speaker, Republican Patrick McHenry, additional powers so that urgent legislative work can be done. President Joe Biden makes a wartime trip to Israel, telling the Prime Minister, "You are not alone," as Israel continues its military response to Hamas's brutal attack on Israelis. The President says he'll ask Congress for an unprecedented support package for Israel's defense, also saying there's no higher priority than the release and safe return of all hostages Hamas is holding. And because the U.S. unequivocally stands for the protection of civilian life during conflict, the President says he's glad that Israel will allow Egypt to deliver limited amounts of humanitarian aid to Palestinians in the Gaza Strip. In Washington, President Biden's pick for U.S. Ambassador to Israel, Jack Lew, testifies before the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, saying he'll work to make sure Israel has what it needs. Republicans on the committee asked Jack Lew about his role in the Obama White House when it came to sanctions on Iran. And also today, a National Institutes of Health Director nominee confirmation hearing. Dr. Monica Bertagnoli, the hearing that was held up months by the chair of the Health Committee, Bernie Sanders, as he pressed President Biden to do more to contain high prescription drug prices. This from thehill.com. House Judiciary Committee Chair Jim Jordan, Republican of Ohio, suffered another loss in the Speaker's race Wednesday, failing to win the gavel on a second ballot of voting after a growing number of Republicans declined to support his bid. 22 Republicans withheld support from Jordan. The vote was 199 for Jordan, 212 for House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries, Democrat from New York, 5 for former Speaker Kevin McCarthy, and 7 for House Majority Leader Steve Scalise. 10 people voted for someone else. The GOP opposition was less than what some Republicans, including Jordan allies, had predicted, but the tally is nonetheless an embarrassing setback for Jordan. Again, this from the Hill article. It goes on. 20 Republicans withheld support from Jordan on Tuesday, leaving him short of the majority vote needed to clinch the gavel on the House floor. On Wednesday, 4 more Republicans flipped their votes from Jordan to another candidate. One opponent flipped his vote to Jordan, and one Republican who was absent on Tuesday voted for Jordan on Wednesday. And the article concludes the loss will likely fuel GOP calls to empower Speaker pro tem Patrick McHenry as the Republican conference remains divided over who should wield the gavel, with the House still at a standstill. Find that article at thehill.com. This is how it happened on the House floor. It started with the call for nominations for Speaker, and Republican Tom Cole of Oklahoma nominated Jim Jordan.
Mr. Speaker, 2 weeks and 1 day ago, I was on this House floor and in this chamber defending my very good friend and our former Speaker, Mr. McCarthy, from an effort to vacate the chair. And in the course of that speech, I made the remark that those who did this, whether intentionally or unintentionally, were going to put the Congress in a state of chaos and the country into a state of uncertainty. I think the last 2 weeks have vindicated that observation. But we have a chance today to end that chaos and to end that uncertainty. Now, when these races happen, there's always a lot of hard things said on both sides of the aisle. There's a lot of finger pointing that goes on. I don't intend to be involved in any of that today. I think the decision in front of us is far, far too important for that. But I am very proud to place in nomination the name of our good friend, my good friend, our Republican candidate for Speaker, the Honorable Jim Jordan of Ohio. I've had the privilege of knowing Jim Jordan for a long time. I've been in Congress for a long time. So for his entire period in the House, I've had the honor of serving with my friend. Now, my friend is not exactly a shrinking violet. You don't win national championships in college. You don't come to this floor with a sincere set of beliefs and a desire to make a change and be shy about it. And my friend is not a shy person. But I've learned some things about him over the years. He is a person of absolute personal integrity. I've never once had to question something that he told me. He's an honorable man. Also, I think we all know he's a pretty direct man, too. I don't think anybody in here on any issue of any substance would have to guess where Jim Jordan is going to stand. He doesn't deceive. He doesn't dissemble. He simply tells you straight up, this is what I believe, this is why I think it's the right thing to do for the country, and that's what I'm going to try and accomplish, and I'm going to work with you in any way that I can to do it. Now, the other thing I think we've found in the last couple of weeks is what it takes to be a speaker. And the one thing I know, never having been one and never having aspired to be one, that it takes a spine of steel to do this job. My friend has that kind of determination, has that kind of character, has that kind of spine.
Congressman Tom Cole, Republican from Oklahoma, today on the House floor, part of his nomination speech, nominating Jim Jordan, Republican from Ohio, for Speaker. Congressman Pete Aguilar is a Democrat from California and the House Democratic Caucus chair. He again today nominated the Minority Leader of the House, Hakeem Jeffries, Democrat from New York, for Speaker.
Here we are again, Mr. Speaker. And I promise to make these speeches shorter if we get closer to a compromise, but I'm not certain that that's going to happen at this moment. While the Republican candidate for Speaker is making late-night backroom deals to secure the gavel, Leader Jeffries has once again extended the hand of bipartisanship for a path forward. One thing was very clear yesterday: the vote total, 220, 212 to 200. The People's House has spoken, and Leader Jeffries has the support to be Speaker that this country needs. Mr. Speaker, $212 to 200. No amount of election denying is going to take away from those vote totals. We shouldn't, Mr. Speaker Pro Tem, we shouldn't be surprised at the vote count. I noted yesterday the legislative acumen of the gentleman from Ohio. Would it surprise anyone that in addition to not passing a single piece of legislation, he's never put a piece of legislation that has made it to a committee? The Speaker of the House must be a legislator, and the gentleman from Ohio falls short in that regard. He supports an extreme agenda and is hell-bent on banning abortion nationwide, gutting Medicare, gutting Social Security, and giving cover to January 6th attackers. Those aren't the values that we share. If we don't see a speaker elected in this round, there's going to be another candidate and another internal Republican conference vote and a secret ballot, and the country can't afford more delays and more chaos. 15 days should be enough.
Congressman Pete Aguilar, Democrat from California, the caucus chair, nominating Hakeem Jeffries for House Speaker on the House floor. After the nominating speeches, there were 4 tellers appointed, as the case was yesterday during the first vote for House Speaker, 2 Republicans and 2 Democrats, to count the votes. Then the House reading clerk called all the names of all the members of the House alphabetically, 433 total. There are 2 vacancies. And then one by one, each rose and said aloud who he or she is voting for. When that was all finished, the tellers made sure that all the vote counting matched, and the Speaker Pro Tem, Patrick McHenry, presiding over the House, read the results.
The tellers agree in their tallies that the total number of votes cast is 433, of which The Honorable Jim Jordan of the state of Ohio has received 199. The Honorable Hakeem Jeffries of the state of New York has received 212. The Honorable Kevin McCarthy of the state of California has received 5. The Honorable Byron Donalds of the state of Florida has received 1. The Honorable Tom Emmer of the state of Minnesota has received 1. Lee Zeldin of the state of New York has received 3. The Honorable Steve Scalise of the state of Louisiana has received 7. The Honorable Mike Garcia of the state of California has received 1. Candace Miller of the state of Michigan has received 1. John Boehner of the state of Ohio has received 1. The Honorable Kay Granger of the state of Texas has received 1. The Honorable Bruce Westerman of the state of Arkansas has received 1. No person having received a majority of the whole number of votes cast by surname, a speaker has not been elected. Pursuant to Clause 12A of Rule 1, the chair declares the House in recess, subject to the call of the chair.
House Speaker Pro Tem Patrick McHenry, Republican from North Carolina, announcing the result of the second ballot this week for Speaker to try to fill the vacancy left after former Speaker Kevin McCarthy, Republican of California, was voted out just over 2 weeks ago. 22 Republicans voting for someone other than Congressman Jim Jordan for Speaker, and that meant that nobody in the balloting got a majority of the full House. Nobody elected Speaker. One of those Republicans who did not vote for Congressman Jordan is Carlos Jimenez of Florida. He was on C-SPAN this morning before the second roll call vote, but he had voted no, has voted for someone other than Jim Jordan yesterday and planned to do so today. And he talked about why he instead was supporting former Speaker Kevin McCarthy to become Speaker again.
No, because I'm voting for Kevin McCarthy. Yes on Kevin McCarthy, because what happened was, some people call it a drive-by shooting. You got 4% of our conference telling 96% of our conference what they have to do, and I just don't think that's right. And so, Kevin McCarthy is our leader. It's obvious when we're in conference that he's our leader. We need to get back to our leader, undo the harm that's been done for the last 2 weeks by those 8 Republicans and the 208 Democrats that voted along with the 8 Republicans.
If that's the support you have, has Kevin McCarthy told you personally that he wants the job back?
No, he hasn't, but what he has said all along is that he will follow the will of the conference. And that's what guides me. The conference needs to come to that realization. I think we have, that really he is our leader and we need to get him back. But I understand why he did what he did. But this conference, this Congress, this country needs him back. And if we can, I think we can get him and try to convince him to come back, because he's always said he will do the will of the conference.
Is there a place in your thinking, or maybe other Republicans as well, of this idea of expanding the current powers held by Patrick McHenry?
Yes, there is. Look, regardless, we need to make sure that we get back and start operating. And so there are, I think there are a couple of bills, resolutions on the floor that are Republican resolutions to do just that. As we try to iron out how we're going to move forward, if it takes a day or two more, we need to get the House open. We need to go back to the business of the people. And so, yeah, I would be very receptive to something like that.
Congressman Carlos Jimenez, Republican from Florida, speaking to C-SPAN this morning ahead of the second roll call vote this week on the House floor for Speaker. Congressman Jim Jordan, the Republican nominee, again, not getting a majority vote of the full House. He needed 217. He got 199. Carlos Jimenez, one of the Republicans who did not vote for Jim Jordan. Congressman Mike Kelly, Republican of Pennsylvania, is the sponsor of that resolution that would give the Speaker Pro Tem Patrick McHenry additional powers. Congressman Kelly today voted for former House Speaker John Boehner, Republican of Ohio, to be Speaker, to come back and become the Speaker. Reporter Ben Jacobs tweeting that Mike Kelly says he voted for John Boehner for Speaker, quote, because I like him. Congresswoman Lauren Boebert, Republican of Colorado, tweeting the fact that there are members of the Republican Party who want John Boehner back as Speaker tells you everything you need to know. This is just ridiculous. Congressman Chip Roy, Republican of Texas, who voted for Jim Jordan, spoke to reporters on the steps of the U.S. Capitol building after today's vote.
The vote, what, it was net 2 right down, or 1 if you add Gus, right? So he was at 199 compared to 200. Kevin was down to 200 at the low point of his voting during the 15 cycles. So, I mean, it's not meaningfully different, right? I mean, this is just the process. We went through the process in January. So we'll see what happens now where Mr. Jordan wants to go next. And, you know, I'm sticking with him through the process. And, you know, again, the number's not dramatically different. The 4 lost, 2 gained, plus 1 who came back.
Strategically, Jordan said earlier that he asked leadership to go ahead and put the resolution on the floor that said that McHenry would be empowered, because he said he wants to see where people are on whether or not they want to.
Yeah, I mean, I think
what do you think?
Well, look, I think what Jim is doing is calling the bluff of folks that say that they're going to go work out a deal with Democrats. Good luck selling that back home, that you're going to go cut a deal with Democrats to choose the speaker. The fact is, I think I do not favor moving to the floor on that procedure. Never in the history of this institution, never, to the best of my knowledge, have we ever appointed a speaker pro tem with the full powers of the speakership without having elected a duly elected speaker. We have not done that to the best of my knowledge. To do that would be playing games with such an important position as third in line to the presidency. We should do our job and select a speaker. The Constitution says that. So any move to do otherwise is contrary to the Constitution and would do enormous damage to not just the Republican Party, but the House of Representatives. And I violently oppose any effort to do that on the floor of the House.
Do you think there would be a legal challenge to that?
I mean, I believe it's constitutionally not just questionable. I think it is directly contrary to the Constitution in terms of saying that we shall choose a speaker. And to go appoint somebody with the full powers of the speaker without having chosen the speaker makes no sense. So I think we need to take a step back, do our job, and choose a speaker.
It's Congressman Chip Roy, Republican from Texas, speaking to reporters on the steps of the U.S. Capitol building after today's vote. No speaker elected. Democratic Congressman Jared Moskowitz of Florida also came out to speak with reporters. He voted for Democratic leader Hakeem Jeffries to be speaker, as did every other Democrat in the House.
Will Democrats support some sort of legislation that would empower Patrick McHenry to have some sort of temporary speaker power?
Yeah, look, Democrats are committed to trying to get the House open. We've been saying we were willing to work on a bipartisan basis. So, yeah, look, if that resolution comes forward to open up the House and give the pro tem temporary powers to do so, I would support that.
Wow. Do you think that there are a number of your colleagues that feel the same way?
I think a number of my colleagues are seeing what's going on, right? Jim Jordan's now going in the opposite direction. They don't have another person. This will go on in perpetuity. They're clearly broken. They've put the entire U.S. government into complete chaos, and Democrats are here willing to do what is needed to work with them to try to get it open.
Have you gotten any direction from Democratic leadership about how to vote on that?
No, because there's no resolution that's come forward yet. So we got to see what the resolution looks like. We've got to read the details before we decide to vote. But generally, conceptually, I would support reopening it and giving Patrick McHenry powers to do so.
Would you need anything in return?
I don't think you can do that in the resolution. I don't think you can have that on, because that would have to go to rules and things of that nature. So I think it would just be to reopen it for a potentially period of time.
How long would you be comfortable with?
I mean, look, we have to get past the government closure date, right? So it has to be probably through Thanksgiving.
Congressman Jared Moskowitz, Democrat from Florida, with reporters on the steps of the U.S. Capitol building after today's roll call vote on the House floor to elect a speaker, second this week, and again, no one getting the majority of the full House to be elected. The lead vote getters, Republican Jim Jordan with 199, Democrat Hakeem Jeffries with 212, and 22 Republicans voting for other candidates. We spoke with Washington Post House reporter Mariana Sotomayor about what happens next.
A number of Republicans obviously are still against Jordan, and it really looks difficult for him to be able to win over support, given he only won over 2 of the 20 holdouts in 24 hours and lost the 4 more Republicans. But, you know, a lot of Republicans don't even want to meet in closed setting again because they know it's going to probably be nasty and airing of grievances and may not conclude in much. And, you know, a lot of those holdouts are very much not going to vote for Jordan. There are a number of them now talking to a couple of reporters since voting, saying, look, Jordan should get the message that there are a significant amount of us who are voting against him, and that number is only expected to grow the more votes that keep happening on the floor. You asked about Democrats. They're trying and basically signaling at this point, hey, we're open to working with Republicans to empower the current Speaker pro tempore, Patrick McHenry. But it is a little complicated in the way to get that done. What I've been hearing is that there are more Democrats than Republicans at this point who would help move forward a resolution, and a number of Republicans are still waiting to make sure a number of their own colleagues can get on board so they can pass this with significant support to ensure that McHenry could actually get some more leverage and be able to oversee and reopen the House and skirt Jordan, of course, from his candidacy to become Speaker.
Our viewers just heard from Texas Representative Chip Roy, who was highly skeptical about this idea of empowering the Speaker with more powers versus just electing a Speaker.
Yeah, no, it is pretty difficult to do. It's not impossible. It could pass a resolution to do this. It is constitutional. Apparently, it has actually happened over 100 years ago to give a temporary Speaker some more leverage to just be able to pass legislation. Democrats and Republicans would like to extend that power for McHenry till early January, but like you mentioned, many Republicans are against this move. And as we have seen already this year, any time that Democrats have helped McCarthy earlier this year, Democrats helping Republicans to pass anything at all, that received a lot of blowback from members of the Freedom Caucus like Chip Roy. So even if McHenry were to do something like this, for example, he could possibly be voted out as Speaker if they don't change the House rules. So there's a lot of hypotheticals, a lot of unpredictability, which is the world that we continue to find ourselves in here on Capitol Hill.
As far as Mr. Jordan himself, there was a tweet from one of the reporters saying that necessarily he hasn't given up the fight when it comes to becoming House Speaker. I don't know, and it's quick, but I don't know if you've heard the same sentiment around Capitol Hill.
Yeah, so Jordan's spokesman, Russell Dye, is actually informing reporters when we ask him, what are the next steps? Are we going to the floor? Are Republicans going to go meet? His spokesman is telling us that, Jordan is going to keep going no matter what. And that has always been Jordan's personality. He just never lets go of a fight. So it really would take a lot. I think even a significant amount more of Republicans voting against him on the floor to maybe get Jordan to relent. But as of right now, that's his position. He's going to keep going for the speakership.
As far as the tone of when he goes to his fellow Republicans on trying to get their support, there was some reporting about a hardball tactic, so to speak, when it comes to that. Is more of that expected, or is there a change in posture when it comes to the Jordan team in order to get support, do you think?
Yeah, a number of Republicans who are somewhat open to voting for Jordan are now publicly saying that pressure campaign really did not help them vote in support for Jordan. If anything, it made them more deeply entrenched in their belief that they will never vote for him. It sounds like that continues to be part of the pressure campaign. And some of it's even happening organically as, Trump voters across the country are seeing that these Republicans are voting against Jordan. So a number of Republicans, Steve Womack actually was just telling a couple of reporters that a number of his own colleagues are putting out his office number, making it easier for that very strong MAGA base to call these Republicans, the Republican holdouts. And again, that is not making it any easier for any of these Republicans to flip. If anything, a number of colleagues who are, probably going to vote against Jordan in more future rounds are hearing this and also very concerned that this kind of pressure campaign is happening, and do not think a Speaker Jordan would be someone who would be helpful in this case, because this is just a show of how Jordan and his team would govern as Speaker, and that is really concerning to a number of Republicans.
Mariana Sotomayor covers Congress for The Washington Post. She spoke with C-SPAN after today's vote for House Speaker with no one elected. Several of the House Republicans who voted for someone other than Congressman Jordan for Speaker posting about those tactics and the pressure campaign. Kay Granger of Texas writing on X, formerly Twitter, Steve Scalise is an honorable man and has earned my vote for Speaker. This was a vote of conscience, and I stayed true to my principles. Intimidation and threats will not change my position. And Jen Kiggins of Virginia With this, I will never regret standing up for the military and for doing what's right for Virginia's 2nd District. I was a helicopter pilot in the U.S. Navy. Threats and intimidation tactics will not change my principles and values. And the Washington Post reporting after the vote that Congressman Jordan is vowing to stay in the race for House Speaker despite shedding support in the second round of voting. They have a quote from Congressman Jordan. "We picked up some today, a couple dropped off, but they voted for me before, and I think they can come back again. So we'll keep talking to members, keep working on it. We've got a complete cross-section of the conference. There's, 20 individuals we need to talk to. We continue to do that." That quote from Congressman Jordan. And from one of his supporters, Jeff Duncan, Republican congressman from South Carolina, this on X: "Don't lose faith. If Jordan loses a few votes on the second ballot, I'm committed to voting as many times as we must to get Jim elected as Speaker, as long as he is putting his name forward. If that means we vote all night, then buckle up, because we will vote all night." And as for the schedule, there was one vote today, and that was it. The House adjourned. They are back on Thursday at noon Eastern, expected to take a third vote for Speaker. We'll have live coverage on C-SPAN Radio and C-SPAN Television, anywhere on the C-SPAN Now mobile app. Listen on your smart speaker, say play C-SPAN Radio. Washington Today continues in a moment.
When citizens are truly informed, our republic thrives. Get informed straight from the source on C-SPAN. Unfiltered, unbiased, word for word. From the nation's capital to wherever you are. Because the opinion that matters the most is your own. This is what democracy looks like. C-SPAN, powered by cable.
Welcome back to Washington Today, available as a podcast wherever you find your podcasts and on the C-SPAN Now mobile app. Now to the war between Israel and Hamas, following Hamas's surprise October 7th attack that killed more than 1,400 people in Israel. Since then, the Gaza Health Ministry says nearly 3,500 people have been killed in Gaza, more than 12,000 wounded. CNN reports that President Joe Biden on Wednesday capped a historic trip to Tel Aviv by sending an emphatic message of support to Israel, promising new aid to Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's government as it prepares fresh action against Hamas. Following a day of meetings with the Prime Minister and other Israeli leaders, President Biden spoke about new agreements over a humanitarian corridor to Gaza, aid to Palestinians in Gaza and the West Bank, and the promise of a massive new congressional request for funding for Israel's defense. But looming over the trip was the horrifying blast at Al-Ali Baptist Hospital in Gaza City on Tuesday that the Palestinian Ministry of Health says killed hundreds. That article from CNN: Hamas blames Israel for a missile attacking that hospital. Israel and President Biden says that the evidence shows it was a failed rocket launched from another Islamist terror group. Prime Minister Netanyahu and President Biden made remarks at the start of an Israeli war cabinet meeting.
Mr. President, you're meeting with our united war cabinet, united and resolved to lead Israel to victory. This will be a different kind of war because Hamas is a different kind of enemy. While Israel seeks to minimize civilian casualties, Hamas seeks to maximize civilian casualties. Hamas wants to kill as many Israelis as possible and has no regard whatsoever to Palestinian lives. Every day, they perpetrate a double war crime, targeting our civilians while hiding behind their civilians, embedding themselves in the civilian population and using them as human shields. We've seen the cost of this terrible double war crime against humanity that Hamas is perpetrating in the last 11 days. As Israel legitimately targets terrorists, civilians are unfortunately harmed. Hamas is responsible and should be held accountable for all civilian casualties. We saw the cost of this terrible war crime yesterday when a rocket fired by a Palestinian terrorist misfired and landed on a Palestinian hospital. The entire world was rightfully outraged, but this outrage should be directed not at Israel, but at the terrorists. As we proceed in this war, Israel will do everything it can to keep civilians out of harm's way. We have asked them and will continue to ask them to move to safer areas. We'll continue to work with you, Mr. President, to assure that the minimal requirements are met, and will continue to work together to get our hostages out. Mr. President, the road to victory will be long and hard, but united in purpose and with a deep sense of justice and the unbreakable spirit of our soldiers and our people, Israel will prevail. Thank you, Mr. President.
Well, thank you, Mr. Prime Minister. In the wake of Hamas's appalling terrorist assault, it was brutal, inhumane, almost beyond belief what they did. This cabinet came together and standing strong, standing united, and I want you to know you're not alone. You are not alone. As I emphasized earlier, we will continue to have Israel's back as you work to defend your people. We'll continue to work with you and partners across the region to prevent more tragedy to innocent civilians. 75 years ago, your founders declared that this nation would be one based, quote, based on freedom, justice, and peace. Based on freedom, justice, and peace. The United States stands with you in defense of that freedom, in pursuit of that justice, and in support of that peace. Today, tomorrow, and always, we promise you.
President Biden and the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu in Tel Aviv. This from Reuters. Palestinian security forces fired tear gas and stun grenades to disperse anti-government protesters in the West Bank city of Ramallah, seat of Palestinian Authority President Mahmoud Abbas, one of the Arab leaders who canceled a meeting with President Biden. Tensions also ran very high on Israel's border with Lebanon, where clashes between the Iran-backed Hezbollah movement and Israel over the past week have been the deadliest since the last all-out war in 2006. President Biden later in the day delivering a 15-minute speech in Tel Aviv, again reaffirming U.S. support for Israel, including what he called an unprecedented aid package. Multiple reports say the Biden administration is putting together a supplemental national security package to send to Congress of up to $100 billion that would include not only aid to Israel, but also to Ukraine in its fight against Russia and for Taiwan, and possibly securing the U.S.-Mexico border. In the president's speech, he spoke about humanitarian aid to Gaza and the West Bank, saying that many have compared the October 7th attack in Israel to the 9/11 terror attacks in the United States. He said, while you feel that rage, don't be consumed by it. After 9/11, we were enraged in the United States. While we sought justice and got justice, we also made mistakes. Here's President Biden.
I'm the first U.S. president to visit Israel in time of war. I've made wartime decisions. I know the choices are never clear or easy for the leadership. There's always cost, but it requires being deliberate. It requires asking very hard questions. It requires clarity about the objectives and an honest assessment about whether the path you're on will achieve those objectives. The vast majority of Palestinians are not Hamas. Hamas does not represent the Palestinian people. Hamas uses innocent families in Gaza as human shields, putting their command centers, their weapons, their communications tunnels in residential areas. Palestinian people are suffering greatly as well. We mourn the loss of innocent Palestinian lives like the entire world. I was outraged and saddened by the enormous loss of life yesterday in the hospital in Gaza. Based on the information we've seen to date, it appears the result of an errant rocket fired by a terrorist group in Gaza. The United States unequivocally stands for the protection of civilian life during conflict, and I truly grieve for the families who were killed or wounded by this tragedy. People of Gaza need food, water, medicine, shelter. Today I asked the Israeli cabinet, who I met with for some time this morning, to agree to the delivery of life-saving humanitarian assistance to civilians in Gaza, based on the understanding that there will be inspections and that the aid should go to civilians, not to Hamas. Israel agreed the humanitarian assistance can begin to move from Egypt to Gaza. But let me be clear. If Hamas diverts or steals the assistance, they will have demonstrated once again that they have no concern for the welfare of the Palestinian people. And it will end. As a practical matter, it will stop the international community from being able to provide this aid.
President Biden delivering remarks in Tel Aviv, Israel. As he was flying back to the United States on Air Force One, a statement from the White House Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre. Tomorrow, President Biden will address the nation to discuss our response to Hamas's terrorist attacks against Israel and Russia's ongoing brutal war against Ukraine. The speech will be delivered from the Oval Office at 8 p.m. Eastern. Again, that's Thursday. We'll have live coverage, 8 p.m. Eastern Thursday, on the C-SPAN networks. Story from Associated Press. The United States vetoed a UN resolution Wednesday that would have condemned violence against all civilians in the Israel-Hamas war, including, quote, the heinous terrorist attacks by Hamas against Israel, and would have urged humanitarian aid to Palestinians in Gaza. The vote in the 15-member Security Council on the resolution, sponsored by Brazil, was 12 votes in favor, the United States against, and Russia and the United Kingdom abstaining. U.S. Ambassador Linda Thomas-Greenfield said after the vote that President Joe Biden is in the region engaging in diplomacy to secure the release of hostages, prevent the conflict from spreading, and stressed the need to protect civilians. She said, we need to let that diplomacy play out. And she also criticized the resolution for not saying anything about Israel's right to defense, self-defense. That's from Associated Press. In Washington, D.C., Congresswoman Rashida Tlaib, Democrat from Michigan, a Palestinian American, spoke at a protest calling for an immediate ceasefire on both sides of the war between Israel and Hamas.
The majority of Americans are literally against oppression. They're against occupation. They're against human rights violations. If you just tell them the truth, they will be on our side. So we have to speak the truth. We gotta stop allowing people to police our words, to target what we say. At the end, Maya and Shamash should be alive. And if we don't get back to our shared humanity, I don't think we're ever going to be able to come back from this. And to my president, to our president, yes, he's still our, well, hold on. I want him to know, as a Palestinian American, as also somebody of Muslim faith, I'm not going to forget this. And I think a lot of people are not going to forget this. And it's not a threat. It isn't. They think we're joking. I mean, I think the White House and everyone thinks that we're just going to sit back and let this just continue to happen. No. The fact of the matter is, our lives are not safe with you or the forever impeached president. When are we going to feel safe? When are we going to stop funding continued, literally, oppression of indigenous communities? When are we going to say enough? It makes me so angry to have to say it, but I'm telling you, I'm talking to people that literally are like me. They literally believed in this party that was supposed to be inclusive of all of our opinions and our views and our political stance and all of these things. But what is starting to get really clear and very loud is that somehow many of us in this room, because of our political opinions, because maybe our faith is a certain faith, maybe because our ethnicity is a certain ethnicity, that somehow we're subhuman, that somehow we're not as equal.
Congresswoman Rashida Tlaib, Democrat from Michigan, at a protest on the grounds of the U.S. Capitol. There was also a protest inside the Cannon House office building. A few hundred protesters wearing shirts that said, Jews demand ceasefire now, and that's what they chanted. And the U.S. Capitol Police says that there were arrests of those protesters not allowed inside the House office building. Meanwhile, on the Senate side of the Capitol, President Biden's nominee for U.S. Ambassador to Israel, Jack Lew, appeared before the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. Jack Lew, NBC writes, is Jewish, has decades of experience in Washington, and has been active in pro-Israel advocacy circles. He was the White House Chief of Staff for the last 2 years of President Barack Obama's first term, and then was Treasury Secretary from 2013 through 17. He was also director of the White House Office of Management and Budget under Obama and President Bill Clinton. During the Clinton administration, he helped develop the Memorandum of Understanding on multi-year U.S. funding for Israel. And during the Obama administration, he worked several times to provide, quote, crucial funding for Israel's missile defense systems that are designed to protect residents from attacks. A White House official said recently, that reporting from NBC News. The committee chair, Ben Cardin, Democrat from Maryland, asked Jack Lew about what the war between Israel and Hamas means for peace long term.
Well, the immediate need for the United States is to help Israel deal with this war, providing the support it needs, dealing with hostage relief, dealing with the potential escalation and preventing that from happening. That's going to be the immediate concern. But looking beyond that, and you mentioned the Abraham Accords and normalization, one of Hamas's objectives was to derail the normalization discussions that are taking place in the Middle East, with the most visible being between the United States, Israel, and Saudi Arabia. So tell me a little bit about your view as to how you keep these normalization discussions alive during a time of war.
Mr. Chairman, it is going to be a challenge until this war ends for people there or here to focus on the day after. But I deeply believe that those of us who have responsibility in this area, as I will if I'm confirmed, have to keep our eye on the strategic objectives. Because you look at the question of negotiations between Israel and Saudi Arabia, if it was in the national interest of Israel and Saudi Arabia 2 weeks ago, it's in the interest of Israel and Saudi Arabia when this war ends. And we're a critical part of that conversation. I have had extensive dealings with many of the governments in the region. I would pledge my utmost support to making that conversation one that can get back on track. As I said in my opening remarks, it was the mission I thought I was going over to start with. I dearly pray that we get back to that mission soon.
Jack Lew, nominated for U.S. Ambassador to Israel, questioned by Senator Ben Cardin, Democrat from Maryland, chair of the Foreign Relations Committee. The story from Fox News, some Republican senators are signaling they may oppose Biden-nominated Jack Lew from the ambassadorship to Israel due to his record on Iran relations during his time as Secretary to the Treasury. In 2018, a Senate report by the Investigative Subcommittee of the Senate Homeland Security and Governmental Affairs Committee found that Jack Lew, during his tenure as Secretary under the Obama administration, quote, granted a specific license that authorized the conversion of Iranian assets worth billions of U.S. dollars using the U.S. financial system. That from Fox News. Here is Senator Jim Risch, Republican from Idaho, Foreign Relations Committee Chair, asking Jack Lew about this today.
To quote from the Washington Post opinion piece, it says, Lew must explain why in 2015 he promised the same committee that he would not allow Iran access to U.S. financial system under the recently announced nuclear deal with Iran, yet secretly tried to do just that by working to turn $5.7 billion in Iranian assets into easily convertible currency via U.S. banks. So I'm going to pursue that line at this point. I want to ask you, first of all, if you recall sitting in that very chair in July of 2015 and stating, quote, will continue under the JCPOA, Iran will continue to be denied access to U.S. financial and commercial markets. Do you recall stating?
Mr. Chairman, I remember that testimony well, and I believe that we kept Iran from becoming part of the U.S. financial system, and I'm happy to discuss the implementation of the JCPOA. I know you and I may not agree on the policy of
That's an understatement.
The JCPOA, but what we did was we implemented a policy that was transparent, that I testified before this committee on in terms of what was being done. We negotiated with Iran to have them roll back their nuclear program, in exchange for which they would get access to money that was their money that we had frozen. All we did was facilitate that transaction. So we did not welcome them back into the U.S. financial system.
Did you, on February 24, 2016, issue a specific license to Bank Muscat, authorizing Iranian assets worth roughly $5.7 billion to flow through the United States financial system?
We did issue licenses. I do not recall. Yes. I do not recall whether those licenses were the vehicle through which funds moved. I don't believe they were. But the concern was we had made an agreement to return money transparently in this committee, and returning that money was the bargain for a nuclear deal. That's all we did.
Are you telling us you notified us that on February 24th, 2016, you had authorized that specific license to Bank Muscat?
Mr. Chairman, that was a specific license, and there is not a practice of notifying specific licenses. General licenses are published. Specific licenses are not.
I want to quote one of the executives from Bank Muscat when they said there was a gigantic breakthrough which has assured Iran of almost full global financial inclusion. And that was in response to the license that you issued on February 24, 2016.
Well, Mr. Chairman, I can't speak to what someone at the Bank of Muscat said. What I can tell you is the government of Iran believed that we did not give them what they expected, which was full access to the world financial system. They complained that my actions were what kept them from getting full access to the world financial system. I know that some of you are going to ask me questions about what my team said when they went around the world. My team went around the world telling banks all over the world, we did not lift the sanctions on terrorism. We did not lift the sanctions on human rights violations. We did not lift the sanctions on regional destabilization. Be careful. And Iran thought that kept them from getting what they thought they should get. We did the letter of the agreement, gave them what was agreed to in the JCPOA, nothing more.
Jack Lew, nominated for U.S. Ambassador to Israel, former Secretary of the Treasury. Question by Senator Jim Risch, Republican from Idaho, Foreign Relations Committee Chair. President Biden was elected on a pledge that the U.S. would try to re-enter the Iran nuclear deal negotiated by President Obama in 2015, known as the JCPOA. President Trump withdrew the U.S. in 2018. And at today's hearing, Jack Lew told Senator Pete Ricketts, Republican from Nebraska, that trying to re-enter will not happen soon.
Do you believe that the Biden administration should continue to restart the JCPOA talks?
I don't think this is the moment for us to be negotiating with Iran. I believe deeply that an agreement to not have nuclear weapons would be a good thing, but this is not the moment.
You can find the full Senate Foreign Relations Committee hearing with nominee Jack Lew, nominated for U.S. Ambassador to Israel, at our website, cspan.org. Former Ambassador to Israel Thomas Nide stepped down in July. Since then, there has been an acting ambassador. Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen says the U.S. is sanctioning 10 members of Hamas, a financier in Qatar with ties to Iran, and a currency exchange based in Gaza, saying the U.S. is taking swift and decisive action to target Hamas's financiers and facilitators following its brutal and unconscionable massacre of Israeli civilians, including children. This is Washington Today. President Biden's selection for Director of the National Institutes of Health, NIH, Dr. Monica Bertagnolli, testified at a confirmation hearing before the Senate Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions Committee. An article at Axios says it comes after 5 months of waiting, and that Chairman Bernie Sanders, independent from Vermont, relented on holding up the nomination over his concerns about the Biden administration's lack of action on drug prices, and that he agreed in September to schedule this hearing after the administration moved to limit the price of a new COVID-19 monoclonal antibody from Regeneron. That from Axios. Senator Sanders asked the nominee about this issue today.
If you are confirmed to be the next NIH director, will you commit to reinstating and expanding the reasonable pricing clause in NIH contracts? In other words, if the federal government puts money into the research and development of a drug, will you insist that the price that drug is charged in America is not higher than it is charged in other countries around the world, given the fact that we've paid for the research and development?
Chairman Sanders, I can say that I myself believe that the American people deserve a fair return on the investment that Congress has placed within the National Institutes of Health and the research that we do. And I will commit to working to make sure that the benefits of our research are affordable and available to all the American people. I cannot give further specifics at this time about the execution of that plan.
So you're not prepared to tell us that when taxpayers spend billions on a drug, they will not be asked to pay the highest prices in the world for what they paid for?
Chairman Sanders, I am more than prepared to say that I will do whatever I am able to make sure that affordable and accessible care is available for everyone who needs it.
Dr. Monica Bertagnolli is nominated for Director of the National Institutes of Health. She's currently Director of the National Cancer Institute. Question by Senator Bernie Sanders, independent from Vermont, Chair of the Health Committee. Senator Roger Marshall, Republican from Kansas, and he's a doctor himself, asked the nominee about care for transgender youth.
Should taxpayers fund gender reassignment experiments or research that are purely cosmetic, where you destroy healthy tissue and organs, or when they use FDA-approved products off-label with significant negative, irreversible impacts? Again, this off-label use isn't treating diseases or illnesses. Should taxpayer funds be used to do research or fund these irreversible, horrifying, irreversible procedures and the use of these hormones off-label?
So, Senator, thank you very much, because it's very clear that you share my concern over the well-being of the LGBTQ community, especially young, vulnerable people. What I can tell you is that if confirmed, I will commit to leading NIH to conduct the research that will achieve the very best health for these vulnerable and special individuals.
Sorry to cut you off, but right there, do you believe that it's okay to fund this type of research where these irreversible procedures are being done? Do you think there's any experiment that you can think would justify irreversibly damaging these poor little boys and girls who are 14, 15 years old? Will you fund that type of research?
Any research that we do, Senator, with regard to human subjects has to be done in a way that does no harm and produces the maximum benefit to the people that are participating in the research. And that will be the principle with which I approach any research, especially for this vulnerable population.
NIH Director nominee Dr. Monica Bertagnolli, questioned by Senator and Dr. Roger Marshall, Republican from Kansas. NIH has had an acting director since former director Dr. Francis Collins resigned in 2021. You can find today's hearing, Senate Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions Committee, at our website, cspan.org. Wall Street today, the Dow down 332, NASDAQ down 219, S&P down 58. Story from Politico, the Senate on Wednesday voted to overturn a Consumer Financial Protection Bureau rule requiring lenders to report demographic data on small business loan recipients, defying a White House veto threat. Senator John Kennedy, Republican from Louisiana, who sponsored the bill to invalidate the measure under the Congressional Review Act, called the regulation intrusive in a floor speech before the Senate voted 53 to 44 to scrap it. The House must still act on the resolution. That from Politico. Thanks for listening to Washington Today. Sign up for C-SPAN's evening newsletter, Word for Word. It's free, and get the stories making headlines in Washington emailed to you every day. Subscribe at cspan.org/connect. Have a good night.